Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iterate, and the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Welcome to the Lights Out Podcast. I am the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. Along with me, as always, Miguel Iterate. And Miguel, we got a little bit of a treat. We've got mixed martial arts archivist Charlie Smith with us, and we're going to have a new little segment called Mixed Martial Artifacts. Charlie, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience so they know exactly who you are and what it is you do as a hobby?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, Miguel, I want to thank you for bringing me on board this episode and kind of giving you an idea of what I'm trying to accomplish, what we're working at, the overall big picture of everything. For several years, over a decade now, I've been working very closely with the sport of mixed martial arts. A lot of different fighters, a lot of different events. And over time, as the sport's evolved, everything's changed. I kind of found myself reliving the old days of NHB, Vale Tudo. And I said to myself, the sport's changing a lot. It's become more mainstream. And what I fell in love with is kind of, I don't want to say gone by the wayside, but it's almost a different sport as it is today. There's a lot more gambling, a lot more casual fans. It's presented more as a business. Back when I fell in love with the sport, there wasn't packed out arenas. It was small venues and a lot of the guys fighting for passion, 3 fights in a night, sometimes 4 fights in a night. Really the heart of the warrior, I think, was established in those days, the foundation. And I said to myself, as much as I love this, when you talk to younger folks today, they have no clue about the history of mixed martial arts. So there's got to be a way to bring the new fans in with the old school MMA. And actually stumbled across your podcast doing some research and always looking, and I thought, wow, these guys, they're doing the exact same thing I am. I'm just doing it a little bit different of a way. I've been collecting and gathering items from fighters and getting agreements and verbal contracts with some fighters that wants the physical MMA museum, which I'm helping curate and working on a couple different projects to get the official brick and mortar store or building up and running. So I've been gathering these items and working hand in hand with a lot of different fighters, a lot of guys that's been on your podcast in the past. And but yeah, that's what I'm working towards, and got some pretty neat items to share with some people would like to see.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're going to do. Miguel and I were historians at heart in regards to doing our research. This gentleman right here goes and collects the items. He's going to feature an item that Miguel and I are going to either just kind of right from the hip or from our research, we're going to kind of break down exactly what makes the item special. So by you guys joining us, we're helping Charlie curate his MMA museum, and we're also spreading history. So with that,
it's a project after my own heart. Even, I've been doing this, for the better part of 3 decades too. And, collecting and stuff. I've supported collectors. I used to give away my passes and mail them to guys and things like that. And passes and shirts and, anything you can get your hands on and things like that. So definitely that type of mentality appeals to me, and all the love and support. And Mike, man, what do we got? Because I want to see some stuff, man.
Right. So with this and our subsequent episodes, we're going to be breaking everything down so you, the fans, can enjoy it as much as we do. Welcome to the Lights Out Podcast. I am the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. Along with me, as always, my partner in crime, Miguel Iterate. Miguel, joining us for this brand new segment is none other than archivist Charlie Smith. Why don't you introduce the first item that you would like Miguel and I to take a look at?
Actually, the first item is one that I acquired a while back. It means a lot to me, and I think a lot of the hardcore fans. We actually was able to get in touch with Pat Miletich, who, in my opinion, was one of the prototypes of mixed martial arts and being a complete fighter. And I was able to gather a pair of gloves, but not just any pair. It was actually his first pair of MMA gloves. It was from the first ever Battle of the Masters, which I think you guys know a little bit about that event.
So, Battle of the Masters, Miguel Iterate, we might know a few things about this. October 20th, 1995, it took place in Chicago, Illinois. It was an 8-man tournament, and it was mostly regional guys. And Pat Miletich, believe it or not, when we interviewed him, he said he was the last person to enter the tournament. Miguel, do you remember any of the other notable names in particular, maybe his first opponent that he may have went up against?
I think it's Yasunori Matsumoto. And
Yes.
Matsumoto was a hardcore legend in Chicago and in the Orient, apparently, in those days. And, you know, Pat reports breaking his arm and then having the guy hit him with his broken arm. So sounds hardcore, sounds about right.
So Matsumoto broke his arm on Pat and continued to use it to pound on Pat. The fight went 7 minutes, 40 seconds. And as we said, it was an 8-man tournament. But Miguel, what's really interesting about that event also is Monty Cox was in attendance, and we obviously know what kind of contributions he has made to the world of mixed martial arts, especially in the beginning days. That was his first ever attended mixed martial art event.
Yeah, I think, you know, you don't want to say equal to Pat's achievement because Pat, you know, is a transcendental figure kind of thing. But, you know, Monty's close in terms of importance because, you know, for the historians, obviously, Pat's more conversational. We can talk about it. But Monty, you know, with the number of shows he did and things, you know, him meeting and seeing the crowd, thinking, hey, I can do this. You know, Pat, he says Pat talked him into promoting as well. So that relationship, yeah, it started there. And, you know, in American mixed martial arts, that may be one of the founding relations of the sport. You know, if that hadn't happened, shit, where would we be?
So think about this. You got Monty Cox, who promoted close to 300-400 shows, giving many people platforms in order to advance themselves to the next level. You got Pat Miletich, who was the first 170-pound champion for the UFC. You know, both of them came together. But how that tournament rolls out is Pat beats a 3-time national karate champion, Matsumoto, in the first round. Second round, it's Angelo Rivera out of an old school gym called Combat Do. And the third fight was, I got it written down here, Kevin Mariano. So Kevin Mariano is actually a Keith Hackney prodigy, one of the early Keith Hackney guys. And he was also really good friends with Andre Arlovsky. He beat one of Andre Arlovsky's guys to advance. So there was like a lot of history there. And Miguel, do you remember? It's actually on video. If you go on YouTube and you can watch it. Do you know what Keith Hackney was yelling to Mariano in the corner while he was fighting Pat?
Oh, Mike, you love this stuff. You enlighten us, please.
Hit him with the eagle claw. The eagle claw. I don't know what that meant. You can hear it loud and clear on the YouTube video. I'm glad he didn't land the eagle claw because Pat got his hand raised. But there's a couple other things of interest in regards to this. So at this time, mixed martial arts in Illinois was not legal, but it wasn't illegal. It was kind of like one of those things where it's caught in between. Miguel, you remember this time, am I correct?
Yeah.
So it's legal, but not illegal. So you kind of had to rely on the commission to kind of turn a blind eye, not complain, not try to shut down the show. So at the time, there was an Illinois commissioner named Shonie Carter. Shonie Carter has got the respect of all the old school guys across the board. He's a Chicago youth organizer for boxing. He's got a small pro record, but he's somebody that spent a lot of time in a boxing gym. So rather than like try to overrule or overregulate, he just needed promoters to do the right thing. That's what he wanted. You do the right thing and we're good. Kind of one of those types of relationships. So Tom Latuli was a promoter for this. And Tom Latuli, he's a karate guy. He's a karate guy that saw an opening. He used to do like little point fighting type things. And initially, like people would think, oh, he's got to be a Shidokan guy because Shidokan is as close to MMA as possible. And it really originated here in Chicago. that is not the case. Originated in regards to competition. I mean, obviously Shonie is from Japan, but in regards to national competition here in the United States, Chicago was the headquarters for that. So he was like a point karate guy. And the deal that I had heard, and I'm almost positive this is true because I know a couple other promoters around this time that reiterated to me that they fall into the same category. He said, no posters, no advertising, only word of mouth, and I think a little washing of the hands. That's what had to take place. So Tom Latuli and Sean Curtin, they got along well, but the relationship wasn't long to last. What happens is Miguel, local Chicago heavyweight back in the days, got a 50 Fight Club member, Jim Theobald. Do you know that name?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What kind of reputation would you say Jim Theobald had back in the day?
Jim Theobald was definitely an X factor. You know, he was a guy who was a ticket seller in Chicago, so he tended to fight at home. And, you know, a lot of people think that he built up a record, but, you know, a careful analysis of the guy was very well trained. He was very well prepared for what he did. And, you know, going back to conversations with people from that era, he went to Purdue University and like he wasn't on the wrestling team. He was like the weirdo in the long coat kind of thing. But everybody knew he was tough on campus as well. So Jim Theobald is close to my heart. I actually matchmade for him once.
Okay. So Jim Theobald was absolutely going to go to the UFC. They had conversations about it, but the UFC couldn't match the number that Jim was making at home through ticket sales. He was such a popular fighter that he was making more here than he could fighting on TV. So by the time they were ready to thread that needle, Jim got on the fire department and he rode out into the sunset. They wouldn't allow him to fight. However, one day Jim won a tournament for one of the Thule shows. As he was leaving, and Jim is, like Miguel said, very respected guy. He gets robbed, except he gets robbed and he recognizes it's one of the ring crew that's doing it. Jim, from what I am told, goes and talks to Sean Curtin. Tom Latuli's days of promoting shortly ended after that. Sean Curtin didn't play that stuff. Like, you can do whatever shady things you want, you know, hit me on the back end, but you can't be like doing like I don't know. You can't be drawing undue attention to yourself. So that's the story of Tom Latuli. He died of a heart attack in the late 90s. He had a couple other offshoot shows after the next commissioner, Pacillo, came in. Ron Pacillo, phenomenal commissioner. And yeah, that's it. That's what I know about that event. And the gloves, Miguel, where do you put those gloves in regards to significance?
You know, we're talking museum here, right? So, I mean,
Yes.
This is the kind of thing that, you know, you walk into like, I don't know, would it be like the Hall of Gloves? And even in the Hall of Gloves, this would have a central place. Like maybe even, you know, unless you've got like
showpiece,
like the first gloves ever used in the UFC or something, which, you know, Charlie may have, but we'll get to that later. But it would take something like that to replace Pat Miletich's glove, first lightweight champion, and, you know,
first MMA fight.
Yeah, and it's his first. And the bottom line with Pat is that I think you'd be hard pressed to find a guy that affected the generation after him as much from that era. Him and Horn together made a team that put 5 UFC champions in at once. You know, that's still unduplicated even by the giant teams now. You know, they concentrate on a big star fighter and stuff like that. But, you know, every Iowa fighter basically that we saw in the UFC had to go, you know, probably cut his teeth at Miletich's, and he owns a very deep tree. So I would say, Charlie, would you consider it a showcase piece? Because to me, I would say you have to put it in there. You know, something like that.
Yeah, I think that item in itself would have probably have gone by the wayside and eventually been thrown in the garbage. If not, it's very interesting. And maybe you know the answer to this question, Mike. I don't. But I think I would rather have been hit with the eagle claw than one of those gloves, because I don't know if you could see, the gloves are about this thick. So I'm guessing that you had to wear some sort of gloves in Illinois at that time to even compete. I don't think anyone was allowed to not wear gloves in that show.
So when you flip open, see this is very interesting. This is where it gets interesting. What is there a name brand on those gloves?
No, it looks like something that you would get out of the back of a karate magazine, you know, in the 80s.
Those are Kenpo gloves. So they're either Harbinger gloves. Like, does it look like a metal bar was taken from the outside, from the inside of that glove?
No, I think I know what you're talking about on
those. Are Harbinger
They also
gloves.
They had the wrist wrap gloves, the Century wrist wrap gloves, like that Chuck Norris was on the cover. These actually have like a neoprene band across the front of the glove, and the padding is literally maybe a 1/4 inch thick. So there's hardly no padding. It's just very minimal padding.
Do you think? Okay, there's a couple different things here now. So, do you think it may have been like football lineman gloves, because Pat had to use those, and when he fought Chris Brennan, they were using like lineman gloves. Do you think it was one of those? One of that?
It's very possible that you know, I never really thought about that, but that's a very good possibility, because I've never acquired another item, a pair of gloves that look like this. And I mean, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of pairs of different gloves from regional shows to, you know, from Pride gloves to Wano gloves. You know, even going into some of the Japanese promotions of the old days, rings gloves, you know. And I've never seen this glove. It's there's no name brand on it. There's nothing to really say what it is, but it's almost as if they found the absolute smallest thing that they could put on their hands, because you legally had to have gloves. It's very interesting.
Do you know who I could send this to that would really help us out with this? Shonie Carter. I can get Shonie. I can ask him to take a look at it, tell me what he thought. But it's kind of a rule of thumb. The Harbinger gloves, which Dan Severn was made famous for leaving the metal in his fights. And then there is the the football pads.
Yeah, I believe Tank wore the Harbingers, right?
Pardon me?
I think Tank wore Harbingers when he started wearing those as well. Yeah, these are definitely, these are red, so it's a different color. I don't know of any other different, you know, any Harbingers or any other glove company that made a red at that time period.
And right now they're showing it on the video here, but you know, I think you're absolutely right, Charlie. From what you're looking at there, those certainly look like the, you know, order the red pair, order the blue pair from the back of the 80s magazine.
Okay.
You know?
Or, you know what? I misspoke. I apologize. I misspoke. I said Shudo. That is not true. San Shao. San Shao, a traditional karate where it's like stand up, a lot of punching to the chest. Kick. I think you can kick to the head, but you can only punch to the chest. San Shao gloves were also very popular around this time for mixed martial arts competitions to use. Now, keep in mind, at this time in MMA, the UFC was bare knuckle. So to kind of skirt the rules or keep a commission or, you know, a building or company happy from in order not to report your event, you would say, well, it's gloved, you know, and then it went on to open palm fist strikes, you know, with submissions, but you can elbow to the head, you know, crazy stuff. But at this point, I'm almost willing to bet it's either a football lineman glove or the San Shao, and I'm probably leaning towards San Shao.
I think to answer Miguel's question, when you really look deeper into this item, it opens up so many different avenues, not only for a museum showcase piece, it could be a museum showcase piece for mixed martial arts in general, for one of the greatest coaches, one of the greatest fighters of all time. It could be an actual item in itself to showcase MMA gloves and where they started, the foundation of it. It could be the showcase for the Battle of Masters itself and its legacy that it leaves behind, or the start of, you know, everything that happened in Bettendorf, Iowa, in a little training facility that kind of took over the world. If you listen to Pat Miletich speak, when he tells you stories or he tells somebody a story, you would say, this can't be true. And it's just all matter of fact talking. And you would think, man, there's no way anyone done this. But the amount of champions that gym produced, and amount of fighters that was on television that weren't on TV at the time, the amount of world champions and regional champions, nobody's ever come close to what he's done. There's no parallel.
No. And the crazy thing is Pat wins the title for the UFC. I think they called it, did they call it lightweight at the time, Miguel?
I think so, yeah.
So it was a 170-pound lightweight title. They started adding other weight classes. They moved it up to welterweight, which is where it is today. And after he loses to Carlos Newton, he fights like maybe 3 more times in the UFC. And if you compare his fights towards the end of his UFC run as compared to his build-up towards his title, Pat is kind of falling apart. Like you see him kind of walking real stiff and robotic-like, in like favoring one side rather than his other. But his last 2 or 3 fights in the UFC are his most electrifying, some of his most impressive wins. And I think it was just the flood of talent that he was bringing to the organization. They almost kind of forced his hand to retire, even though Pat still had that competitive spirit in him. Now, Miguel, in our interview on our long form channel, this is obviously the Clips channel, on our long form interview, Miguel, do you remember the note that Pat said he had in his dresser?
Yeah, that if he had not won a UFC title, he was going to, commit suicide.
Yeah, he was going to kill himself. Yeah, I mean, like he wrote it. He said he had the gun in his top drawer, and if he never won that UFC title, that's when he knew he was seeing his way out. Now, you can kind of sit here and say, oh, wow, that might be a little embellished or whatnot. Pat's had 2 siblings that actually went down that road. Like he is from, like where he comes from is from a real hard, like it's a rough traveled road in the game of life. And he's a guy that leads by example. Now, Pat, I got a ton of respect for.
So could you imagine being the pound for pound, maybe greatest fighter in the world right now at that time, and still training 30 to 40 other guys fighting on cards? The responsibility of not only being the best, but training these guys, managing a lot of what they're doing, coaching them on a day-to-day basis. Nobody's ever done this. Nobody has ever competed at his level. And I mean, he was first lightweight champion. They changed that to welterweight. So was he really the first 2-time or 2-division champion ever?
No.
I mean, that would be an argument as well, wouldn't it?
He made the same weight. It's just the weight, the name changed, but the weight class stayed the same.
They changed the weight class name. But
yeah,
it's an interesting semantic. I understand where you're coming from. Charlie's just trying to start a museum, man. Come on.
That's right. So, ladies and gentlemen, new segment, Charlie Smith, MMA archivist. Hold up. Let me say it one more time. MMA archivist. Miguel, I got that right, dude. So I got MMA archivist Charlie Smith. I'm Mike Davis, Miguel Durante. And with that, we will see you next week.